Well, I'll just start by saying, first of all, it's great to finally meet you face to face, even though it's electronically. The
Sort
other,
of face to face.
yeah. Well, the other obvious greeting is thank you for your service. I notice you're wearing your hat today. Which give us a good look at that. What is that?
I am. It is U.S. Army, and it was where I went right after my first Continental experiences. Went into the service in '66 during the height of the Vietnam War,
Right.
and Cam threw me a going away party and gave me a Bible and said good luck. And so, yeah, I was off to the Army for 3 years.
Well, talk about that a little bit. I was wondering if there was any, sort of connection between the two experiences.
There was the main one was that when I got to where I was assigned, I was a chaplain assistant. So when I got to where I was assigned, which is Alaska, I found out that the assistant before me had also directed their choir. So it was a natural thing for me. I'd never directed, but I've
Right.
certainly watched someone who did that very well. So I took over the choir program and ended up with a small group, with an ensemble, and then with the choir, and that was a big part of what I did for 18 months.
No kidding. I never knew
Yeah,
that. Well,
and the caveat to that was that Cam shared music with me, so
really,
I not only had your basic choral music that you can get from anywhere to
publishers.
buy, but he would send me music and I could mimeograph it off. And maybe you had never seen any of his original stuff, but there was some chicken scratching going on there, you
Oh
know?
yeah, no, he did the chicken scratching for a long time, even into the early '80s. He had copyists come in and clean it up. So
Oh,
oh,
right.
I've seen.
So that was neat. I wanted to go on his first CSI tour of '67, and I contacted him. As a matter of fact, I auditioned my guitar player, and he ended up on that 1967 tour with Cam.
Huh?
I wanted to go also. I found out that in order to do that, I would need to have 40 days, and there was no way I could take a 40-day leave without special permission. So I had to go to the fort commander, not my boss, but the commander, colonel, and say, I'd really like to do this. This is my experience. And he said, well, he said, when Jerry was here, we won the Alaskan Command Choir contest. If you can win the contest, you can have the 40 days. So I got a song from Cam. It was a super great, moving arrangement of Deep River,
Oh,
and
so good.
I got another one from it was a Russian spring folk thing. To long story short, we won the contest. I got my 40 days, and I spent the first 40 days of 1967 on tour.
That's crazy. I've never heard that story from Cam. Wow.
Well, the other part was that we had another guy in the service who was stationed on the East Coast, and he took the last 40 days. So we sang the same part, both second tenor. The day I left, or the day after I left, he came in, and we were rolling.
Very creative. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, that was neat.
Well, thank you for serving, and thank you for being a part of. For those of you watching that don't know about what we call the originals, there were groups prior to Cam making the Continentals an official California entity, a 501c3 entity in 1967 with Ralph Carmichael signing the
Right.
papers. There were several years of tours that Cam directed, and Wes, you were part of that. So we affectionately call them the originals.
The originals.
Uh,
Yeah. It was different though, because not just a rehearsal camp, we performed all year long.
right.
So this is November, 62 years ago this month, I auditioned for Cam along with about, a bunch of other kids.
Sure.
I think he chose about 20, and we did rallies, we did churches, and then we did tours. So the rallies were every Saturday night, Youth for Christ
Yeah.
rallies, and the tours were self-explanatory. They were summertime, and then the churches on the weekends we would often do a church. So between our rehearsing and and all of that, it was much more like a full-time job
Right.
as opposed to, just a summer.
Well, talk about those early experiences on tour and the things that you learned from Cam. I mean, you're one of a very really small group of people that actually were in a group that Cam personally directed. Then he's
Right.
trained other directors, and that's really the premise of Roundtables. I told my board for years that I think our stock and trade, if you will, is leadership and the duplication of leadership. So but you were fortunate to be there actually under his leadership. Talk about some of the things that you learned during that season.
Well, and a number of other people, early directors were too.
Hmm.
Will Rensema,
Yep.
Paul Fleshman, Ken Wagner.
Yep.
Well, let's see, myself. I'm sure there must have been a couple of others, but um, we learned from the master. I mean, I've always considered Cam a mentor, and picked up on his good things and probably picked up on some of his bad things. But it was it was a kickstart to my entertaining career. Being in the Continentals, the earliest days of Make It Happen.
Mm.
As you know, that's you get to a place and things just go sideways, and you make it happen anyway. Um, then, of course, the mantra, to whom much is given, much will be required. You've heard that. I've heard a number of people
Yep.
on the chats here talk about that.
Yeah.
I think mine would go on a little bit further, and it would be to excellence. Just dedication to excellence. If you're going to do that, if you're going to perform in the name of Christ, whether it's secular, because the whole rest of my performing career was in secular music,
Hmm.
or sacred, you do it to the best of your ability, and you do that with Christ's hand pushing you and forming you, and making sure that what's going on. It was a little bit different than I know a lot of the people that have been in tour A, B, C, D, E, H, and so on.
Right.
um, One tour, one bus, one truck, and Cam as the leader. And so we did that 63, 64, 65. And then, as I mentioned, I also was able to go on part of 67 before it split into the multiple groups. And I was under Steve Hilson for 2 summers. That summer of 70, up in Alaska on a boat. I can't remember whether you've had anybody talk about that yet.
No.
But wow, um, we we were 3.5 weeks on a boat, an old converted minesweeper that belonged to a ministry that Steve Hilson was aware of down in South America, and they brought it up. They picked us up in Anacortes, Washington, and it was it was pristine Alaska before cruise ships.
Right.
There were no cruise ships at the time. So when we sailed in with our 150-foot boat or whatever, it was a big deal. So we performed from the boat many times, Ketchikan, Matanuska, I mean, Indian villages,
Yeah.
just a Skagway. Yeah, really, really beautiful. If you've had that experience, have you done Alaska by any chance? Have you been up there?
Yeah, my first tour, American tour that I directed in 1982 was to Alaska.
Ah,
It's a fantastic experience.
yeah. And Steve Hilson shot the cover for one of our Continental albums up there.
Running through the meadow, I think, right?
That's it. Yeah. If
Okay.
you look closely, I'm the one on the far left.
Well, as you went into your music career, talk about that a little bit. How did your Continental experience show itself in all of that?
Well, part of it was that I never worked for a company that wasn't a Christian company. So I worked for a company called Young American Showcase.
Mm.
That, matter of fact, there's a new, not a new now, but a book out called God's Rock and Roll Army, all about the company Young American Showcase. And it was a group of guys doing rock and roll, going into the schools, inviting kids back at night and sharing the gospel with them after doing a whole secular concert.
That's
You don't need to tell it like it is, to do that. You you just you just share with them and be honest with kids. And so I did that for a year. I did 4 years with a company called American Entertainment Productions, doing in a show group called Life. And Life did assemblies to get us by, but then our main bread and butter was uh, conventions, fairs, festivals, and so on. So and working with other artists. So we did our whole during the 70s, I think I worked with almost every major artist that was out there. Tony Bennett and Bob Hope and Tennessee Ernie Ford and Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton and you name it.
wow.
We did shows with them. That led to when I got off the road, I went into their office to do uh, production, producing theme parks, cruise ships, USO shows. Um, and then still performed in a group called Good Time Singers, which was the group that backed up Tennessee Ernie Ford for the last 15 years of his career.
There must have been quite a bit of overlap then with your early Continental days.
The basics that you learn, how to tape down mic cords and electric lines, finding the electric, um, getting on and off the stage even. Um, the most important part was just showing people that you were not a aloof, and in the rock and roll sense, a turn your back on the audience kind of people.
Right.
So it was all very much from personality that you were on stage, and that was, of course, goes back to Cam also.
Like you had to pull one nugget out of your pocket that was like the biggest thing, that gold nugget that you got from your Continental experience. What would that be?
What I learned is that my later years of tour, which actually were not were Continental, but they were also New Hope.
Right. Talk about
I
that.
learned I learned that I was more relatable to the parents than I was to kids. And thinking back now, we were, as a Continentals, a young ensemble of people, and I think that's why we were successful, because the older people in the church who were almost ready to accept contemporary Christian music,
Right.
not quite.
Yeah.
We still had some horror stories there in New Hope in their first years, but I think they were able to see that our interest was in really reaching kids and not just entertaining. That was part of it. And the other part was setting an example for kids. People would drag their kids in and say, okay, see this guy? I want you to be like him,
Right.
one of those kind of things.
Right. Who were some of the people on those tours? I'm sure there would be names.
Good people.
Have you ever wished you could gift your life-changing Continental experience to someone else? Well, you can. Your monthly giving can make a huge impact for our teams all over the world. Did you know that this year, we'll have more than 20 Continental groups on the road, communicating in 7 different languages? The Continental story goes on, so keep writing your part of it by being on our support team. And our groups will say, thank you, in 7 different languages.